Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 11 of Humanity Rising. Every day for the last 11 days, starting on May 22nd, we've gathered between 5 and 7 o'clock p.m. Central European Time on Zoom to have probably the most important conversation in the world right now. And that is how we're going to transform the crisis that the coronavirus represents into an opportunity for human renewal. All of us, in one way or another, are still under lockdown. We're engaging in social distancing. We are undergoing an experience that is unprecedented in the annals of humankind. This is the first time where virtually everybody, everywhere on planet Earth is sharing the same experience. And that has put us in the same conversation for the first time. And so how we dialogue with each other, how we discern the priorities for the future could not be more important. We started the first 10 days of Humanity Rising by listening to circles of women from all over the world. We convened in this manner because we believe that the radical and immediate empowerment of women in executive leadership around the world and in every government and organization is crucial to ensure that the post-pandemic world is sustainable, that it's resilient, abundant, healthy, and in alignment with Mother Earth. We completed those women's circles yesterday. It was an extraordinarily powerful series of days that ended in Timbavati in South Africa, listening to the roar of the white lioness that is so deeply attached and attuned to humanity. And in fact, according to deep spiritual traditions in Africa, is coterminous with humanity. The fate of the white lions and the fate of human beings are inextricably intertwined. We now turn to 7 days of circles of youth, again from all over the world and from a range of disciplines and organizations, because we believe that young people are going to inherit the earth, certainly. They're going to experience the whirlwind, given the fact that climate change is spinning out of control. And they need to be empowered in every way that we can to ensure that they can participate in shaping the post-pandemic world. As the president of Ubiquity University, I am delighted to introduce you to the three conveners who are all on our staff, starting with Nora Cellini, who's our Dean of Admissions, Matt Robertson, who's a Special Assistant to the President, and Raji Jayasinghe, who is our press officer and works on our social media team. I'm delighted. I'm so proud of everything that this team has done to pull together 7 days of youth voices. And I want to now turn it over to you, Nora, to begin our program. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. And thank you everyone for being here. And welcome to today's NextGen Circle as part of the Humanity Rising Global Solutions Summit. As Jim just mentioned, my name is Nora, and it's my pleasure to open today's session with Matt and Raji from Ubiquity University. In a moment, we will introduce today's circle, which will be on future capitalism and the planet, youth, green business. But first, I have a few announcements. All sessions are recorded and you may access or share them afterwards through our Ubiverse platform or Facebook or YouTube as well. We will begin with a conversation among today's panelists before moving to audience questions. So you may contribute your questions or comments in the little chat room, and we'll do our best to address them all. But before we start, I really wanted to say a few words about NextGen and why we created this circle and gave this week of time to younger generations. So this rising generation of decision makers and global citizens comes together with the shared understandings that our world is in crisis, in deep crisis. We are the largest and most connected generation to ever exist, and we enter these conversations fully aware that our lives and those of our children hinge on the actions we take today. So we share the responsibility to identify and implement solutions. We recognize the real change starts with our daily thoughts, our interactions, our choices, and that each one of us has a unique role to play in our unfolding story. Lasting and regenerative change can only manifest through our collective intelligence and radical collaboration. Collaboration that is built on a spirit of diversity, tolerance, open-heartedness, and trust. So we really represent current and future generation in how we live our lives today. We seek to empower each other to alter the story we want to live. We invoke creative solutions to innovate successfully for a more sustainable and resilient planetary society. So with these words in mind, I wanted to let us all take a moment of silence. Perhaps we want to connect to our heart and also just appreciating this moment of history and of being all together. If you want, you can tap into your heart and close your eyes. Thank you. And now I'll pass it on to my colleague, Raji, who will introduce this week's panels. Thank you.
Thank you, Nora. Hello, everyone. My name is Raji. I am speaking to you from Sri Lanka. I wish I could see everyone's faces, but I feel you, and it is amazing to be here. I'll just take a couple of minutes to go through what we have scheduled until Sunday of next week, because we're really excited about what we have to offer. So today, as you know, we're hearing about future capitalism and the planet, about youth green business. Then tomorrow, June 2nd, we hear from Synagos on the topic of personal empowerment and leadership in times of crisis. On Wednesday, we move to Asia, and we actually have an entire panel from one of Asia's best universities, the National University of Singapore. And we'll see what some of their MBA students are doing to tackle COVID-19 challenges. On the 4th of June, that's Thursday, we hear from an organization called Force of Nature, from anxiety to agency, how to step up rather than shut down in times of crisis.
Can I interrupt you for a second? Could you readjust your camera, please? Thank you.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Then moving on to Friday, the 5th of June, we hear from ISIC Tanzania. ISIC, as some of you may know, is the largest youth organization in the entire world, and they do amazing social impact work. What we'll hear about on Friday is about youth leadership in continental Africa during COVID-19. On Saturday, we'll have a session with the Ubiquity University team so that you can hear about the work that we're doing around the world and our personal experiences. Finally, on Sunday, we'll hear from a group called City Transformers, and they'll talk to us about transforming cities for a post-pandemic society. So that's what we've lined up. We're super excited about it. And now I will hand over to my colleague and good friend, Matt, who will introduce something I'm very, very excited about. So over to you, Matt.
Thanks so much, Raji. And thank you, Nora, for a beautiful opening. Throughout this week, we also want to honor the role of art and artists in this movement. We're coming together to have critical discussions about solutions, and artistic expression is an important part. It can be an expression of our spirit. It's something that goes beyond words and can connect to everyone universally. It's really a powerful medium through which to break down barriers and really honor our unity and celebrate the diversity that really defines our generation. So I'm extremely excited today to introduce to you one of my favorite spoken word artists who is on the front lines in the Denver, Colorado area. We're in a time of unrest in the United States, of protest, and Lily Fangz is an integral part of this movement. She is a hospice worker as well as a doula, but in terms of her creative offering, Lily Fangz is about fully engaging in the creative explorations of life, biting down, infecting those with passion, perspective, and perhaps asking the questions that aren't posed enough. Wordplay started way back, writing since she could hold the pencil. And that process evolved into stories, sketches, poetry, rhymes. Her memory is capacious and flows sick like contagious. So she began to share her words and release them free from their pages. She gravitated towards performance poetry, a lot of slams, jams, and ciphers, and realized that making music and art is the only thing that can quench her thirst. So Lily Fangz is here to bless our space today. Thank you, Lily, and over to you.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everyone here in this moment that we can see and that we can't. All ancestors with us now, all who have come before us, and all leading the way. I'm very grateful to be here and the opportunity that we have to virtually all come together. I just have a short little prayer in the words of a rhyme schematic. It's from my heart, and I hope it lands in your heart, or your brain, or wherever it needs to go. Our hearts are knocking at our rib cage again. The doors are opening and they sending us in. There's soul work to do on this here plane. There's whole hurt for you. Don't dismiss this pain. Discomfort is where the neurons of our being bow down. Discomfort is where we learn how to carve our own crown. It takes raw flesh and truth, old soul and tooth. And I know we must have something, so let us step into the proof. We can all decide. Are we gonna take this ride? Our courage is strapped up and we got wisdom on our side. Grandmother's been talking, but we've had wax in all our ears. Dancing with our demons, so entranced by fancy fears. And destiny is waiting, knocking at your back. You've got Atlas on your shoulders, and I promise your spine will never crack. So may we step forward in remember we have everything we need. There is no lack. But it feels like there may be, it feels like white and black separations of the moment, and we're seeing in grayscale, digital, in between moments while we lift the veil, because they say the time is now. And they say the time has only ever been now. And they say the time is never just sun, and the time is never just clouds, and the time is never to run throughout time. Guns have always been cowards, and time has always been power. And so maybe now is the time of another Twin Towers, or maybe now is the time to grow a billion flowers. But mostly the time is now, and the time is ours, and the time is hours, and minutes and seconds, and breaths, and it seems like a million years until we'll finally have rest. But tick-tock, it may be a moment past the age of Aquarius, and I know the fears are various, but we must muster up the strength to grow. And from the bottom of our roots, we can soak up the nutrients slow until the ink of the blueprints glow, and we redefine a paradigm where Red Riding Hoods go, and we stop dividing hoods, because when the winds of change blow like they are doing, it'll be a tornado. They've been whispering change for far too long. We're all here to improve, right? Perhaps walk in a few pairs of shoes, right? Learn lessons about the soul, that it doesn't break, it doesn't bruise, right? It may feel like it is, but similar to a bone, just gets stronger. Maybe you feel like you've been hanging on a jungle gym, not sure if you can keep your grip any longer. So we drop and trust that the net will appear. Our reflexes are on point, so it's not the fall that I fear. My third eye, yeah, might be open, but I keep catching its tear. So here is where we stand up for what we mean by community. Here we stand up for free speech and unity. Here we learn the language of each other's hearts until we speak it fluently. My prayer right now is that we learn to speak it fluently. I think that's all the time we have for this morning, unless Matt, you want to let me know. And I hope it was loud enough, and I hope we continue to be as loud as we need to be, literally and otherwise. What do you think, Matt?
I could hear it well, and I think that if you have another offering for us today, we could take a few more minutes to hear it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, this was found this morning, so it hasn't been sent out loud since Trump election, I guess, is when this was written. Still applicable, unfortunately. So we're down to ride for freedom. Then we gotta stop falling for the circus tricks. Democracy dismantled. Like photoshopping perfect hips, there's several succubus serpents, and we tend to call that politics. Like they are sucking souls of serpents. Nothing more than lolly sticks, but a wise text once said, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. Well, this system may be built this way, or it might be shattered, more than broken, more than bent. And this is a call into yourself, no matter how this all goes or went. Take all the time we need with sacred rage to rant and write and vent. Then call ourselves awake. And remember, we're not hell-bent on deciding we're unworthy of heaven. And before the wide rivers run red, I'ma do this for the next generation 7. We've all got a job here, and some days I wish mine was different. Some steady brick building the bridges while others are breaking down the prisons, dismantling the systems of the boxes that keep the phoenix caged instead of risen, not realizing that all we have to do to rise is really fucking listen. And some days the voices in your head may be stubborn and resistant, and they write a story of unworthiness. And the soul tries talking with them, but then we're caught in empty rhythm, not lost but all too distant, at a rate that's mostly risen, and you feel lost inside the mission. But when that sunny star set glistens, may we remember the power of our hearts. And we can come together, get realigned with the vision, and that is where we'll start. That is where we'll start. This is a lot for 8 a.m.
Just the right amount.
Just the right amount. That's what we put in our in our oatmeal. Thank all y'all change makers. Let's get it.
Let's get it. Thanks, Lily.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Lily. That was so powerful and straight from the heart. Thank you so much. So I would like to now introduce our panel. And so we're really excited today to hear from Andréa Paige, representing the Institute of Aliveness in this session entitled Future Capitalism and the Planet, Youth Green Business. So who's Andy? Andy really was once sort of a disgruntled youth, like many of you watching. She really began traveling the world at the age of 16. And then at the age of 19, she decided she could no longer join the real world of capitalism or work for the man. So what she did is she went off grid and spent the better part of a decade living in eco-villages, in tree houses, and in the tropical jungle, as a career in health and yoga grew out from under her feet. So until the world could meet her in transformation, so now she's come back to connect the worlds of the practical and the idealistic, the spiritual and the intellectual, and to be the change we wish to see in the world. So it is my sincere pleasure to now introduce you to Andy. Hi, Andy.
Hi, Nora. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to Ubiquity and Jim and Matt and Raji and Nora and everyone watching today, and especially to Lily. What up? Word up. Love that. Yes. How can we all come into that space of creation from inside of us and from knowing truly who and why we are? And so I was asked by Nora and Jim to put together a collection of change makers, of people who are able to, have that acrobatic thought sphere to be able to imagine a different and a better future, and not just stay in the imaginary realm, but rather enact it in life, in action, in business, in how they live. And so I have with me Kavitha, Tia, Eric, and Sue. All of you can turn on your cameras now. And I want to say, first of all, that we have no specific agenda for this, that each of these powerful individuals has come with their own wealth of experience and perspective. And so we'll be hearing from them one-on-one, and we would love to collect questions from you, the audience, of what comes up for you when you hear each of them speak. We're literally broadcasting from 4 different continents here, and the essence of what we're talking about will be emergent. So nothing's been pre-planned or pre-scripted. We're in this here with you. And in creating a panel about youth, I thought that, youth is a perspective into the world. I have a worldview myself of astrology, and we understand that there are certain initiations that we go through throughout life. And from the perspective of youth, right, there's a certain quality of naivety, not out of any kind of ignorance, but just from lack of experience, at least this time around on the planet. And so I thought that there would be no better way to kind of start the engagement with youth and this week of youth other than inviting an elder. And so we are lucky to have with us Sue Lennox, who is has recently been elected, or perhaps chosen, I think, as the New South Wales Senior of the Year. And so from this perspective of someone who has worked with youth for her entire life, and who is really the heartbeat of educating the possibility of what youth could become, Sue, I would like to invite you to co-host with me and to kind of set the stage from, if you wouldn't mind, perhaps also sharing the story that you told me about when the Vietnam War was happening, when there were riots like there are outside today, when the world was in a similar upswell post-60s era of this kind of revolution. And if you would bring from perspective, from your place in life to us today.
Thank you, Andrea. It's a real treat to be here with you, and it's 1 a.m. in the morning here on the east coast of Australia. I'm coming to you from Gumbaynggirr country, and the first thing I want to do is to give my love and respect to the elders and traditional owners of this country, who I am privileged to live and share with, and also draw our attention to being conscious of the ancestors that travel before us and are showering with love now, of all those beings that share this planet time with us, and of all those that are coming after us. And that if we can bring that consciousness to every day and every moment, then that helps us to be present in a way that's expanded and more present. I'm the founder of Osgreen and Youth Leading the World. And as Andrea mentioned, you know, my origins, I grew up in the time of the Vietnam War, and also, you know, the problems associated with the Cold War and the threat of nuclear attack was what underpinned my childhood. You know, we were taught as children, we had drills to hide under our desk if a nuclear bomb went off while we were at school. That was the craziness that we lived in. One of the things that was really interesting about growing up in that time, though, is that we certainly realized the power of young people, or people coming together to protest, and that had a huge impact on what happened here in Australia and also in the US. It got us out of the Vietnam War. And I was determined when I went into teaching to bring this sense of peace education into the classroom. But what I found is that often young people would get really overwhelmed by the hugeness of the challenges. And so my life journey has really been about how do we face up to what's going on with eyes wide open, and do it in a way that enables us to not only face up to things, but actually become agents of change, driven by a vision for a better world. And to cut a longer story short, you know, we set up Osgreen nearly 3 decades ago with that intent of empowering young people across the world. And, you know, to me, it's all about learning to listen deeply to each other, to the earth, and to our own hearts. That's a key part of the going forwardness.
Thank you so much, Sue. And thank you for getting up in the middle of the night, and thank you for living off grid and living the example of unity, not only with the bigger perspective of what's happening here, right, in this country that you say you've been inherited but are not originally from, and also through just the way that you live. And I think that that's the first point that I want to make for anyone listening today, is that literally how we live our lives, the choices that we make in our lives, are the biggest activism that there could ever be. It is the most personal business that we could ever have, is how we demonstrate life, humanity today. So I want to take a second to also introduce the concept of this panel to anyone watching. Future capitalism is, I think, what I called it. And thank you, Nora, for your introduction earlier. It kind of encompassed a little bit of what a lot of people don't know about me, which is that at my root, I'm a political economist. And I was really that, you know, hard-headed intellectual all through the beginning years of university. I was a huge environmentalist, and through traveling the world and seeing really the early stages of what we now see as globalization, I was so incredibly displeased, perhaps is one word. But I knew that what I was seeing and what I was witnessing on the global stage of global capitalism was not something that was inherently integral with who I was as a person. And that by acting in any kind of role in the real world, I would be out of integrity with who I was born to be. And so the kind of off-grid career of, you know, health and yoga and not selling anything except for education and empowerment and experience, that was the only thing that felt integral with who I was. And about 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago now, I went off grid for 3 months. I went into silence for 40 days, and I chose to leave my career because at that time, the decentralization movement had started to sweep me away. And the decentralization movement is one of self-sovereignty, where we start to take back our own power. Rather than being kind of governed by a centralized authority, we can start to either grow our own food or start to create new systems of value through different currency movements. We can start to really take accountability in every aspect of our lives. And decentralization of health was the way in which I existed in the health world. The idea that we can take our health back from having given it away for decades to doctors and centralized authorities. And so as the decentralization movement started to bubble, and I'm sure all of you have heard about it in the vein of fintech, and yet the technology that's behind cryptocurrency is called blockchain technology. And it is really this level of technology that's still nascent and yet holds great promise for what the world could be and for a different way of arranging ourselves. And this is what I was searching for, you know, at the age of 19, an article by Kojin Karatani that I would highly recommend. It's called Beyond Nation Capital State. And it was from a presentation that he gave at Stanford, talking about how maybe we can find this way where we can all come together in a social formation that is not plunder redistribution, that is not the capital exchange of kind of a form of slavery. And it's not the serfdom of having farmers where we take a percentage. It could be a different way that we economically come together. And I feel that we are truly at the brink of that, especially now with the economic collapse, especially now with everything that's happening with COVID. The planetary alignment of what we have now has not been seen for 700 years, right? So this is something that we as astrologers knew was coming. We didn't know in what form, but hallelujah, it's here. So for those of you who are in despair at this moment in time and you know, seeing the riots outside, seeing the separation of people in all nation states, not only in the US, we can take a breath and realize that for something to truly evolve, it needs to kind of have a few cracks in it first. And so this system, as I was talking with Eric yesterday, has been broken for a really long time. You know, it was almost built broken. And now, finally, the bubble is popped. You know, we're willing to see that. And whereas it can be scary and it can feel really confronting, and the reality that you knew it no longer is there. I mean, this is the work we do in spiritual transformation. Everything you thought you were, your name, your ego self, your identity, right? All of this has an ephemeral quality to it. And so as we evolve into acceptance of everything that is, we can take a deep breath, take that deep breath with me, into realizing that everything is unfolding exactly as it should, right? And if we can just trust and have that little bit of trust, it will calm our nervous system enough to have more circulation and more neural activity in the prefrontal cortex, where innovation and imagination comes from. And from that place, we can start to create what will be the future. And so, of course, I hope that most of you have heard the Buckminster Fuller quote about, it's not about fighting the system. It's about creating a new system that will make the old one obsolete. And so that quality of innovation is how I want to open this panel. And it is my great pleasure to introduce our panelists. Perhaps we can go Tia, Kavitha, and then Eric. If you want to share who you are, why you're here, what this means to you. Tia, take it away.
Can you all hear me? I'm going to share my screen because I thought, why not? It's so much more fun to see a few pretty pictures. Ooh, that's not what I wanted to do. Let's do that. Right, brilliant. Can you see the screen properly? Has it all loaded up? Just give me a thumbs up if it works.
Yes.
Okay, so. Okay, brilliant. It's telling me that my internet connection's pretty low, but I hope it sort of catches up with us. You know, for a while now, you know, we've been living a reality that's very much not aligned with the outside world. So it feels as if we're doing something that doesn't quite connect. So there really we require some sort of a bridge. And so for a while now, I've been working on something called Replenishing the Planet. And regeneration, all of these synonyms are really about that, taking whatever we've done so far and making it good again. But there's a lag, and there's also a legacy in the system, right? So the latency is where even if we were to do something good and just shift to a positive lifestyle for the planet, we still have so much to go through that, you know, it will take time for us to sort of manage. So I wanted to show you two pyramids and a little bit more information about the work that I'm doing as well. The replenisher philosophy is to live in harmony with nature and to create ecosystems rather than economies, right, that understand the impact rather than the externalization of waste. We've made it our business at Replenisher to protect the global commons by positively reinforcing sustainable innovation by building technological solutions or any physical solutions for those interested in transitioning away from fossil fuels. So the aim is to move away from fossil fuels and also to build a vision of what we want in the future. And I feel technology is absolutely anything that augments, right? So it can be architecture of eco buildings and cities, which is what we're concentrating on. We also invest in bottom-up innovations, and we develop decentralized tech. We work across all SDGs. For us, it's not one SDG at the cost of the rest. We've worked with about 120 companies with a shared net value of about $500 billion. We've advised about 90 governments on housing and sustainable development. We've indirectly impacted about 2 billion people. I suppose it's easier when you're working with India and China on those numbers, but you know, our exhibition, for example, in Goa has had over 1 million people that have attended. It's an immersive multi-sensory experience. And I'll go into detail later if anybody's interested. We've concentrated our efforts on partnering with Replenish Reserves, which are sequestering CO2. And we've helped target education and behavioral campaigns to really reduce energy use in places like Abu Dhabi by about 20%. We've hosted something close to about 3,000 students, exchanges across the world to Japan, Bhutan, India, the UK. We've had 45 cleanup initiatives along coastal areas. We've created foresight tools, had quite a bit of fun developing these moonshots and retrocasting for C-level executives, and created so many jobs and so many opportunities to understand what people can do to actually shift. And the reason why we've done that is because at the heart of capitalism is a philosophy of accumulating asset. And we see these in landfill sites. I mean, you don't have to look too far in the city to see all of our capital accumulated over there. So cities by nature generate so much waste, and these products and services are completely out of sync with the environment. So what do we need to do to create and design sustainable environments and retrofit the ones that we've got right now? So really at the core of my work is to understand what can we do to support you know, the culture of this shift, and recognize that there is way more to, you know, developing the city, the economy, and the trading platforms. And as Andy mentioned, the sort of digital ledger technologies, which allow for many of the actors to behave in terms of a protocol or a consensus. And I think we're at that stage right now within the sort of liminal spaces, or the imaginal cells, from the caterpillar into the cocoon, or for us it's our homes, into or a chrysalis, and then into a beautiful butterfly. The problem is, however, that in those liminal cells, for us as well, is the shift and the DNA that epigenetically can actually emerge from the environment that we're creating. So that's a little something from me.
Thank you so much, Tia. We are blessed to have you here and to forge the new economy and what it looks like. So our next participant is True Youth Spirit. Kavitha is someone that I know from Auroville, which was my community of rebirth. It is the largest eco-village in the world and one of the oldest still existing intentional communities. And so, Kavitha, I believe you're broadcasting from Indonesia today, but if you would tell us a little bit about the Auroville, the mission that you've inherited, as well as your experience with your education and sustainable design in Europe, and yeah, just your perspective as a young woman in inheriting this world today.
Thank you, Andy. Yes, I'm sitting right now in Bali at the beautiful Biosphere Center. My partner and I came a few months ago for a conference, and we haven't been able to go back to India. So we're actually very happily getting involved in projects and work over here and having the time to reflect more deeply on what is Auroville and what is our work for this world. I'm personally in a really vulnerable place at the moment, like I told you, but perhaps I mention it to others as well. It's been a difficult patch in my life where I'm needing to heal and find new direction. So it hasn't been easy for me to join this call, but Andy encouraged me to do so anyway, so I'm here. Thank you, Andy, for pushing me. Yeah, I feel like I'm going through a second midlife crisis, and in a way, I feel like the world is going through crisis after crisis, and I've been working with so many young people that seem to face the same inner struggle I feel right now, that maybe it makes sense to share my personal story with you as much as it is going to be, as much as I'm going to try to share about Auroville and the youth organization I work with. So yeah, like Andy mentioned, I was born and brought up in intentional community in an eco-village like space. And I spent some years abroad studying in more conventional education institutions and discovering the world and realizing, it's not as easy as it was back home. So I made my way back to Auroville, which is in South India, and started working there in various different aspects in alternative education and governance, and then later in so social enterprise development. And later the community seemed to have the need to engage more young people in the succession of Auroville. And this was a question that came to me: why are more young people not getting involved in taking up a large eco-village project? Because it seems to be a very exciting place and project that many young people might like to take up. But Auroville being one of the larger communities and young people having to shift their lives quite dramatically to make that move, to make that commitment, it seemed to be quite a challenge for quite a few. So I said, okay, let's see. We came together with a bunch of friends and we set up a platform to find out what young people would like to do and how we could make it easier for one another to get involved, not just in Auroville, but also in other eco-villages. I've been working for the last 5 years with the Global Eco-Village Network, and I've been very privileged to see some communities and projects all over the world and realize that actually there is no real need to feel so low. There are so many beautiful projects and people that are working so hard to make a difference. And that is where I'm looking to today to get new inspiration and ideas, and trying to switch off the television, which just brings me really down. So I really believe that community-based solutions are what could possibly be one of the solutions for transforming the world. I've seen a lot of energy within young people to be the change. I've seen a lot of wisdom in the elders in these communities to guide us, and I hope I can share some of that with you today. Thank you, Andy, for having me here.
Thank you for being here, Kavitha. Thank you, and thank you for sharing from that essence of humanity, of really what it's like to be a youth. You have Nora popping in, just send some love. So I'm very excited to introduce someone else who is resistant to coming to this kind of conversation, mostly because he feels that there's a lot of talk and not a lot of action. And so I first met Eric a year ago when I was consulting for his project at the initiatory stages of Now. And Now is a business that's truly kind of spearheading the future of what green business could look like. And so, Eric, welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate the push. I appreciate being here. I feel honored to share space with all of you. It does, especially here in the U.S. I'm coming from Portland, Oregon. It feels like a very kind of heavy time where a lot of us have been knocked down, and we are living in a moment of crisis, and also kind of understanding that this crisis does present an incredible opportunity. And I have been very reluctant to join panels or conversations, and kind of my internal narrative is that there's so much work to be done and I need to take more action. And now kind of coming to a space where I'm open to this also being part of the work. So I really appreciate you sharing your story. I have a really interesting, or kind of, I don't want to say really interesting, but I have a unique story that I've kind of figured out how to get knocked down and get back up over time. And I feel like maybe, sharing the story can be helpful. I was homeless about 10 years ago. And, before that, I didn't graduate high school. I got, I had a basketball scholarship, and I ended up getting kicked out of school. I snuck into college, but got kicked out, and then developed a drug and alcohol problem, and wound up homeless by the time that I was 27 years old, and had a very kind of devastating drug and alcohol problem, and found rock bottom pretty quickly, where I was living in this warehouse. And ultimately I was completely broke, and I was trying to put some money together to survive, to feed myself, and I wound up in my dad's basement, and was like collecting books so I could sell these books to a bookstore so I can have some money to feed myself. And within the box of books, I found a Tony Robbins program. And I actually took this Tony Robbins program back to the warehouse and plugged it into this like boom box up against the wall. And I'm like walking in circles, drinking beer, listening to Tony Robbins. And it was the first time that I'd felt hope in a long time. And what happened was I followed this 30-day program to a T, and did all the assignments, did everything that he told me to, and wound up getting sober within like 28 days. And I didn't have really any opportunity in front of me outside of this opportunity to get on a Greyhound bus and to go sell home security systems door to door. And at the time I was very raw. I didn't kind of understand how to communicate. I was shy. I was uncomfortable in my own skin. And at this point, I just wanted to create a skill set that would allow me to create impact in the world. And I thought, like, what's better than learning how to go get rejected and bouncing back from rejection. And so I ended up, of all things, like selling home security systems door to door for about 18 months. And I just kind of cleared everything out of my life that wasn't working for me. I put my head down and just kind of embodied this extreme discipline where all that I was doing was like studying sales, studying leadership, studying business, and ultimately like was able to like change the course of my life pretty quickly, and got to a place where I made some money. I thought that like success looked like having a nice house and a nice car and nice clothes, and pretty quickly realized that like that wasn't it. That wasn't the deal at all. And so I started kind of looking into what mission and what purpose looks like. What does it look like to live a meaningful life? And kind of in a synchronistic way, I came across this study that said 97% of scientists agree that climate change is real and it's caused by man. And I found an opportunity to get into the solar industry. So at this time, I was a leader within the door-to-door space, and I had a couple hundred people that were out knocking doors. And I thought, why don't we take this model that we kind of understand as far as home security sales, and why don't we take this direct-to-home model into the solar industry? And so I went and worked for a company for a couple of months to kind of learn the ropes of the solar industry, and pretty quickly realized that using this kind of direct sales method, we can create a lot of impact in the solar industry. So I ended up co-founding a residential solar company. It's now like the 4th largest solar company in the country. I kind of spun out of that and decided to build a solar marketplace. I saw an opportunity in the market, kind of a gap in the market where there was a lot of people that wanted to go solar, but kind of didn't understand the value proposition, didn't understand the process, and so built out a solar marketplace and partnered with the world's largest renewable energy development company called SunEdison. And we became their top producing partner in just a few months within the United States. And ultimately, they bought one too many companies, and the market disagreed, and the company collapsed, and I lost everything. It was the hardest time that I've ever been through. It was like 18 months of just trudging through this stress that I cannot quite describe. And it was the most difficult time that I've ever had in my life. And the only thing that I could do was breathe deep, focus on the moment, and just move forward on a day-to-day basis. And ultimately, hit the ground really hard, but wound up in New York City. And I met a friend of mine now that he just came over from Norway. He was looking to find a CEO for a Norwegian company that had become the world's leader in retiring carbon credits, and that ended up being a great fit. So I took the CEO role for a company called Choose. And then, after a while with Choose, I wound up in this living room with somebody who's now my co-founder. He's a 20-year-old youth activist. He's a hip hop artist. He's an author, one of the leading youth voices in the climate justice movement. And we were in a living room with the creators of this film called Ice on Fire. And there was this idea that there's 1.4 trillion tons of excess CO2 in the atmosphere, and we need to remove this CO2 as fast as humanly possible. And so my co-founder and I, we started talking about this idea. On one hand, we've been trying to kind of figure out different ways that we can reimagine the narrative around climate justice. We can reimagine the narrative around climate impact and climate education. But we also kind of understood that there's these carbon sequestration methods that absolutely need funding. And back to what you said earlier, Andy, this there was a lot of naivete involved in the early stages of that. And I'm very new to the climate justice movement, and I've been learning a lot. The majority of what I've learned over the course of the past couple of years has been through young people. But I pretty quickly realized that it's not quite as simple as like deploying CO2 sequestration at scale and going and removing the 1.4 trillion tons of CO2. This is very messy. And, there's injustices everywhere, and there's inequities everywhere. And, within this kind of larger problem, there's also an opportunity to build a radically different future. And, so kind of taking this journey in a very humble way and learning as much as I possibly can, starting to, figure out or define like, what does a radically different future, looks like diverse leadership. It looks like equal rights, equal opportunity, projects where, people have food and land sovereignty. And so, we've really focused on at now is like investing into frontline communities, investing into projects that have diverse leadership. And so we've, taken on projects that, plant trees with drones, food security projects, soil regeneration projects, kelp, and yeah, really looking to kind of build from the ground up rather than the top down. And I think with that, I will shut it down, but I appreciate y'all listening. And yeah, again, thank you for allowing me the space to be here.
Thank you so much, Eric, for being here. And I'm sure everyone can understand why we are celebrating having Eric here. So this is so incredible to have all four of you here. Thank you for being present, sharing your perspectives. I have a number of different questions of topics that I want to talk about. And what I think I want to do is actually just kind of read them all out and have you dive in with whatever feels resonant for you in this moment, whichever question you kind of want to answer. So the first one is in relationship to where we are right now, humanity. What stage of evolution and development from your perspective and your part of the world? Where are we? The second is, what is the most promising initiative that you've seen on the ground thus far, and can it scale? And what does it need? Are there any barriers in the way? Is there anything that you can ask for? And we can ask the audience. There's a whole host of resources here through our human capital alone. 3, greenwashing 3.0, advice on how to pivot from where kind of the climate campaign, in the days of Rachel Carson, Silent Spring, all the way up to Greta, this entire evolution. What is the future of that? What does it look like? And my bias is that it's a bit more empathetic and less about fighting. Hard lessons you've learned from the home front in your own perspective, projects, and worlds. The biggest shift in perspective for individuals to change the world and their life. So I know that was a lot, but I'll let whomever wants to take it away. We'll see who's the most go-getter and inspired.
I have so much to say. I don't know where to begin, right? I mean, on the front, yesterday, I think it was, I'm sitting there thinking, a lot of people, so I was on a panel with Daniel Schmachtenberger, and he was talking about we were at the Rebel Wisdom conference, and we were talking about how if you want to scale something, often, it's very difficult, right, for you to scale something unless if you're going to compete and thrash something down. So if somebody's got that sort of global view of the global commons, or have got that meta relationship or the empathy, often it's difficult for them to have that sort of competitive, kill everybody else and let myself succeed type of mentality. And yet I kind of disagree with that, because to scale in terms of the cooperation model, right, not the we're going to scale for capitalism, but if we're going to scale for cooperation, we really need to scale with community, right? So there's a completely different shift in the way that we understand scaling something and having a really large impact. You can't really do it alone if you are in that cooperative, because you're always in relationship with others. So it's fascinating when we're talking about capitalism and how capitalism grows, when actually it is about developing this sense of property, and for that property to be owned by someone or something. And now we're seeing it obviously through the use of blockchain, which is very different from the consensus algorithm or the protocols of just general digital ledger technology. So it's really fascinating that there is this shift. If you are to move away from this sort of highly competitive environment, the way to scale is to start developing this actualization on a community level, which means that all of us, kind of like what Kavitha was mentioning, that all of us are almost involved in the governance. And so an example of that is Iceland, where they started to work on the renewed constitution, with the entire country being invited to participate, write, and challenge every aspect of that constitution. They also took it to government. It was, it wasn't accepted by the government, But what was really fascinating is the process to get there. So a lot of these movements like Extinction Rebellion or Occupy have been really fascinating. So it comes to this point where it's like, yes, we need change. And then what? We need leadership. How does that look? And it's almost as if the leadership is not one person, although that one person's easy to handle, right? That then creates hierarchies and all sorts of conflict. But actually what we need is sort of flat structures. But then if nobody's done the work to get to leading in that community, it's very difficult. So if you've, say, got a circle of people, like a wisdom circle, I talked about this in my Instagram, a wisdom circle, you sort of like each person holds like the stick and does the work to be there, to be present, to do the personal development or the trauma work, right? And all of us are going through this incredible sort of rite of passage where we don't even know if we're going to live through it, right? There's a question, if I were to touch some surface and, you know, touch my face, all of a sudden I've got this thing called COVID-19, where I have absolutely no idea if I'm even going to live like a week from now. My dad had it. And, you know, we all went through this incredible roller coaster, but to sort of home in on the fact that, you know, there's an interesting discussion of bringing people to what we call adult. At the age of 18, we're expected to make decisions in society for which we're never trained. All of a sudden at 18, you vote. Okay, but what am I voting on? We've never had this discussion at school. We've never been educated about that. Or perhaps, you know, very similar, right, to the way that we understand communal spaces like roads. So if you're to use anything on the road, like a mechanical vehicle on a road, you need a license. And that gives you access to the communal space where you could be a hazard to other people. But who's to say that you're not a hazard if you haven't done the work otherwise? This is not necessarily to say that we need legislation and licenses to vote or to govern or to be part of community, but there definitely needs to be a shift in the way that we're seeing this sort of like benchmark of adult. You know, these decisions that we make much later in life have complications, implications, and it's nice to know where they start. Over to you guys.
Tia, I wanted to pick up on you where you so beautifully led off. And the thing that's been driving me for the last 30 years is finding ways for us to face up to the challenges we face, but to do it in a way that enables us to move through it into informed action. And that journey has been fairly magnificent over the years, and we've touched over 1,600 regions globally. But the thing that I'm really excited about what we're doing with Youth Leading the World right now is this concept of training local people to run the initiative in their own region, and then running in multiple regions interconnected globally. And what we're seeing is really quite astounding. We ran a facilitator training last week, and we've trained you know, over 1,000 facilitators to date. And the concept, I mean, you know, it's like this, it's creating a space where people are coming together on the same way to learn a way of taking this out to their communities. And the thing for me that is really exciting about this is not only the change and innovation that's happening as a result of Youth Leading the World, but also the resilience. And again and again and again, what we're seeing is that in the process of coming together in their local area with other young people to drive change and create change and to lead change, that they are forming relationships with each other and with their community. And when the shit hits the fan, whether it be an earthquake in Nepal or a volcano in Guatemala,
Christchurch.
What happens is that already these are people that are on the ground and connected and can instantly move into action. And not only that, but we're getting first-hand accounts of what's happening in Guatemala or what's happening in Nepal. And this, you know, this is a pretty exciting space to be part of. And it's radical and it's rapid. And I see examples of how change can happen very fast. And we're vision focused. That's the other thing that's important. You know, we do this, and I'd love to read the vision from the crew from last week. You know, we look at what's happening with the world with eyes wide open. So there's, you know, don't avert your gaze. We need to be able to face this in its absolute fullness, because it's pretty horrible right now. And we need to find that part of ourselves that will go, what's the world that I actually want to be part of? And how can I create that? And then put all of our energy into that creation process to create change. Let me just flip over here and I'll read out to you this incredible vision. So we live in harmony with each other and the earth. Our government is representative, our leaders respected for their integrity and wisdom. We have effectively transitioned to low carbon, sustainable technologies. Our economy is powered by renewable energy. Our climate is calm and our rivers and oceans clean and renewed with life. Our food is grown using regenerative systems. Our forests are protected as valuable carbon stores and home to wildlife. Our homes are simple, sustainable, and smart. Our community, schools, and young people play a key role in maintaining life on Earth, fueled by a deep love of learning and respect for the wisdom of First Nations people.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sue. You got me thinking a lot about permission and how, you know, we have, you know, often we don't know whether we're asking permission or we're giving ourselves permission. And that's a kind of a play that's an interesting dynamic. And I think that, you know, in my life up until now, I've always asked myself the question, is this okay for me to do? And often I'll just go ahead and do it, because if I'm asking somebody and they say no, perhaps they're the wrong person to ask. And a number of times, you know, whether it's to go into this room and go and meet Richard Branson or whatever else, and somebody just says, well, no, sorry, you can't come in. And I'm like, well, you don't own him. I will, but I won't do it through you because you're not the best person to ask, right? So it's a really fascinating play. Whatever your dynamic is, to ask permission of yourself first. And if that feels right, then everybody else can, you know, adjust to that. And I really feel that, you know, whether this kind of more introversion of a intuitive relationship that we can have with ourselves can lead us to really putting a beacon in the sand in the night with a light that shines bright enough for other people to know, hey, there's something going on over there. What's going on over here? Is this something that I'm interested in? Do I want to join on to this initiative or agenda? But if you never speak, right? If you never tell anybody, then how are we to know? How are we going to know that you're even there? It's like this resonance thing, resound, resonance, resounding of sound means that you've got to put the sound out in the first place. And if you're silent, that's not going to happen. I'd love to know what you think, Eric, Kavitha.
Yeah, I really love what you're sharing, Sue. That was beautiful as well. You know, one thing that comes up for me is like, as leaders, we have a responsibility to be the change we want to see in the world. And, you know, here in the States, you know, there's a lot of critique about our president or those in office, and very fair critique. And at the same time, I think that it serves us as leaders to look within and, you know, ask the question, who do we need to be to create radical change? And I think in a lot of cases that looks like empathy, that looks like curiosity, that looks like compassion. And, you know, as an organization, as I shared earlier, we kind of had some big ideas around how we would go about things. And, you know, we had to like constantly check in on that. And, you know, these young people have such incredible energy, and they've catalyzed the movement in a way that we haven't seen in really in modern history. And, you know, so I think it looks like humility. It looks like asking questions. It looks like kind of, you know, challenging our own thinking. It looks like, you know, setting our ego aside. We were involved in a project with the San Pasqual community, the Kumeyaay tribe down in San Diego, and kind of had this big idea that we were gonna go plant a bunch of trees with drones. And we said, well, before we do this, why don't we go walk the land? Why don't we go share meals? Why don't we go have conversations? Why don't we go ask questions? And really build kind of deep, meaningful relations with these community members. And what we learned was that like drone planting, was not what was most important right now. Like we needed to provide or help support in providing food security. And, you know, so that's where our focus went instead. And yeah, I just think as leaders, we can learn a lot by asking tough questions and really listening and, you know, talking less about us. But I do also love what you said, Tia, is like, you know, that moment where, you know, you got to step up and you got to step into your power and you have to absolutely go for it. But there's definitely a balance in that.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, what you're referring to at large is known as participatory action research. So it's meeting any kind of environment that you're working with, even if it's just plants, firsthand and looking from their perspective what is most eminent right now. And I'm really thankful to Auroville. In my very early 20s was exposed to deep ecology, which is a wonderful tradition at the intersection between the biological science of ecology and philosophy, to truly like reunite ourselves inside of nature rather than surrounded by or separate from. And that's something I would pull from for anyone watching, as well as the tenets of the Great Turning and the work of Joanna Macy of how to bring a delicateness of feminism to the extraction of capitalism. I was on a call to launch this Ubiquity Solutions Summit with Vandana Shiva, who of course is an icon in our times. And if anyone doesn't know who Vandana Shiva is, please change that now, today, and be aware of the greater thematism of what's going on, the theme of changing from an extraction, isolated, othered worldview, perspective, relationship with each other and with the earth, to one that is empathetic, co-collaborative, and receptive. And this is all the stuff that's flying through the chat. If no one's watching that you guys know. And so it starts with us. It starts with how we spend our time, what we're studying, and how we show up. And like a simple metacognition, awareness of your thoughts and your actions. Like Tia said, checking in with ourselves first at how we feel. Well, that can apply to anything. Like, where is this thought coming from? Where is this action that I habitually do? What is it actually about? What am I really doing here? I went for 8 years in my 20s where I didn't buy any new clothes. I would only buy secondhand clothes. I think everything I'm wearing now is secondhand. It's that dedication of like, what am I actually doing here? How am I engaging at every level of my existence with the world? Kavitha, what do you think about all this?
Wow, so many threads to pick up on. Yeah, I think Joanna Macy, Vandana Shiva, definitely big inspiration. Joanna Macy, especially in this time where I find myself needing to find ways to cope with the pain we see in the world, and also a lot of my friends and colleagues that find it hard to sometimes move into action when you just feel like there's so many things we have to still work on, and there are too many options, there's too much work to be done. And yeah, I've found that actually not being in my community right now, not being in a place of where I can actually work, has been a good pause. My partner and I have been whispering about perhaps having children, and this has been also a big inner conflict of how in today's world could we imagine having a child and having moments where we feel, yes, this is something we feel very optimistic about, because we feel like we have a network of people that are really working hard to save this world and bring beautiful change. And then the next day we are reminded that actually perhaps we are bringing new life into a world that will be very challenging. So yeah, I see this more and more with the networks of youth we work with, that they feel like they have a lot on their shoulders and they feel like they have a lot of work to do and feeling very conflicted of where to start. And I've just discovered, and before this conference, I said, okay, let me take some notes and see what are the biggest shifts in perspective that I feel I need to go through at this moment in order to get back into action. And I realized that small is beautiful and slow is acceptable. I realized that it took me a long time to realize that I don't have to do it all, and I don't have to work with everyone to make it possible, and that I can slow down and that I can scale down. And I think it's a really interesting question you brought up about scale, because sometimes we think we have a solution and we must scale it up and we must replicate it. But I like the perspectives coming out here that we can create inspiration, we can create new visions, but allow different people to interpret them according to where they live and their bioregion and their locality, and understanding how actually scaling is not necessarily replicating or growing in the same way we have imagined before. So I'm in the process of shifting my worldview and really trying to feel it in my body, trying to heal, trying to gain optimism again. And I'm really grateful to hear that all of you are in such a good space, because this is giving me new energy now. So thank you.
Can I just respond to that question? And it's interesting because, you know, this journey that I've been on, you know, I was working with young people as a teacher, and there was a major pollution event in our local lagoon, that our local river, that saw all the fish killed. And the young people that I was working with, you know, I asked them how we could change our community, and just watch them come alive with ideas. And was most significant is to see them have a huge impact on their community, and in their process of designing their own actions and taking them, I saw them just blossom, you know, into these amazing influential people. And we were invited to go to India as a result of that. Now, I had never traveled outside Australia, but we were able to bring, you know, ourselves and some water testing equipment to the River Ganges, and for the first time actually measure what the pollution levels were in Benares. And, you know, that was such a heartbreaking experience that I realized that what we'd begun in Australia actually had a bigger application than I could have imagined. And now for 3 decades, you know, Benares has become my second home. And I've dedicated much of my life to the Clean Ganges campaign and the Sankat Motion Foundation in Varanasi. But the story I wanted to tell was 5 years into that work, I became very depressed. And I became very depressed because the river wasn't clean. And I kind of had it in my head that I would do stuff and the river would be clean. And it wasn't. It was worse. And I was really sick. I had amoebic dysentery and giardia and all kinds of other waterborne diseases. And as I sat with this despair that I was sitting in, I found a place in myself that said to me, you need to focus on doing the work. You do not know what the outcomes of what you do will be. What is important is you keep doing it. And I have found that that shift of perspective has been really, really, really important for me to sustain, you know, what I've been doing now for 5 decades, and to find that place within myself to keep going, no matter what seems to be going on in the outside world.
I love that, Sue. Thank you. I'm actually taking 20 students through an 18-month process of awakening and accountability in all parts of their self. That's what we do at the Institute for Aliveness, and Nora is one of those amazing individuals, and they wrote term papers for their first semester about body. And it was a big process. You know, you can think of people who haven't been in academia for a long time all of a sudden needing to do literature reviews and research and put out a term paper. And it was this big getting over a hurdle, right? And then they turned them in, they submitted them, and there was all of this suspense of like, when am I going to reply and give them a grade? And, you know, it was that outcome that was desired. And really through the practice of it, it's like, no, the journey was what it was about. Like your grade was you on the journey. Like why are we looking for something? And this is the same perspective shift that we embrace as we move away from an extractive economy and an extractive relationship to ourselves, each other, and the planet, as we come into a presence, a more presencing way of being, where it's actually, what am I experiencing right now? Feeling like Kavitha coming here from this place of when you didn't want to show up because you were feeling like a lower part of your life. And it's like, no, this is what it's about. It's not even about the whomever's watching, right? The hundreds of people who are watching this right now. It's about you being here with us right now and sharing this goodness. I mean, there's not a better word, because it's not hope. It's energy enacted. And so that journey, and for all of you watching, like, where are you in your journey today?
And that's a really beautiful question. And I actually invite everyone in the audience to share, like, where are you in your journey? Where does it feel as if you could pivot? And I think that a lot of life is about those reframes, those moments that you can actually take a kind of a period of silence, whether that's what you need, or a moment of sort of really going in to like you did, Andy, with your, silent meditation, to kind of give yourself that space. And if that feels like, slowing down too much, or there's too much anxiety around that, then do it when you're ready. But really give yourself that opportunity to ask yourself these questions. During the COVID sort of period of lockdown in the UK, people have been feeling very traumatized from not being allowed to go outside. Of course, there's this whole area of mental health at stake, because we're not allowed to go outside and do all the things that we would normally do. We're social beings, and to be able to connect with others is really important for us. So yeah, please do reframe where you are, just as Crystal, you're saying, this opportunity to really kind of, is this story that I've been holding, an embodied story that I've been feeling, is this in alignment with who I want to be or who I am? And that is just a very simple question, but it can take, days, if not months, years to understand, because these narratives that we've gathered ancestrally, even stories, traumas that we've held intergenerationally, and sometimes even transnationally, can really bog us down. And kind of like the amygdala when it's stressed, right? When you're in some kind of anxiety or you're in an emotional state, the amygdala sort of flared up. And it's like, I'm, on alert, I'm on alert. The moment that you stop and you say, right, this is how I'm feeling, or this is what's going on right now, the amygdala sort of calms down. And so that high stress state, the anxiety, the trauma in action, sort of starts to, I wouldn't say dissipate, but it gets seen. And it gives you the opportunity to allow the process, like Andy was saying, to unfold in whatever way, in the trust that you have that it is the way that it is. And as it's unfolding, you trust that it's happening and that you're there with it, not that it's going on and you're sort of behind somewhere. So yeah, I just wanted to presence that was sort of coming up inside me.
All right, does anyone else want to chime in? I mean, we can go back to those questions. We also have some questions from the audience, which are beautiful. I can read those from Carlos Prosser, and anyone who's watching in the webinar feature, there is a place to put Q&A. So do put your question here if you'd like. But Carlos Prosser, youth of the planet, what do you feel and think about the present violence erupting all over the world? Are you still hopeful? I'm going to field that to Kavitha.
I am hopeful. I think underneath all the questions in my mind, I am hopeful, and that's mostly because I have chosen to focus on all the beautiful efforts and all the beautiful people that are connected to me in this life. It's been tough receiving so much information. The time I spent educating myself was my first midlife crisis. That's why I refer to this as a second, and maybe there will be more. But when I spent time collecting all this information on how the world and how we are contributing to its downfall, it was overwhelming and it was depressive. I mean, I found that we are really, really good at sort of recording our own demise, and it is been a process for me to shift away from that, to make conscious choices, not to search online, not to go onto the television, not to feed that side of myself that enjoys looking at all the bad news, and just shifting away to the good news, to the eco-village projects, to the inspiring individuals who are working so hard, to actually visiting my neighbors, walking into villages around Auroville in India, and realizing that so many people are just living their lives and might not have access to the internet, might not have access to even a phone, and are not aware of the crisis or are facing their own life crisis, but in smaller ways and in more localized ways, and that I don't need to worry too much. So yeah, slowing down and taking the time to look around me and disconnect from social media to a certain extent, from my laptop to a certain extent, and get back in touch with people and real people that are doing real work has been very healing, and has given me a real sense of hope. Now with the COVID lockdown, we are so grateful to actually have been stuck in a campus, in a bioregion, which allows a little bit of movement. So we have been experiencing, again, a sense of healing, but also a sense of just feeling so rejuvenated to be able to go into the ocean, to walk in the forest, to realize that the work can be done in very small ways by planting a few plants, cooking more consciously, taking the time to eat slowly, talking about children, talking about family, talking about friends. I'm so grateful in a way that the whole world has got some time to breathe and take a break and really reflect and realize that there is a lot of hope.
Thank you, Kavitha. And all of those things can seem so trivial when you're not willing to presence, right? It can be like, oh yeah, you're just talking about family, or you're just talking about cooking. But like when you actually allow yourself to feel the emotion of the human experience, it becomes the only important thing that there is. Yeah. Thank you. So we have another question here from Dehana Rice. What's the biggest surprise that you've discovered in your life's work? I'm going to field this one to Eric, and then anyone can pick it up from there. Biggest surprise that you've discovered?
I think for me, I don't know if it's the biggest, but one of the more recent surprises that I've felt kind of ties into what you were saying, Tia, and also you, Kavitha. And also thank you so much for being here, Kavitha. I appreciate you showing up the way that you are. But yeah, for me, I shared a little bit earlier about how I came from a certain background, and I have like attention deficit disorder, and I didn't have certain tools. So I spent a lot of my life like focusing on, or the recent portion of my life, focus on like productivity and being productive at a very high level. And it sort of turned into this like, obsessive work ethic and, just like fixation on providing as much value as I possibly could to as many people as possible. And, I sort of made this part of me that was ADD, that was creative, that liked to slow down and share meals with people and get into deep conversations. I sort of cut that part of my life out for a little while. And, over time I became burnt out. I was working really hard, and ultimately just became burnt out. And, this recent experience that is COVID, I've got the chance to slow down, and I've gotten the chance to stay up until 2 in in my underwear, Googling and creating, and having nowhere to be, nothing to do, and giving myself no rules, giving myself permission to create. We're working on a docu-series, and up until COVID, it's kind of been hurried. It hasn't really got all of my soul. And I've just been so busy and, kind of moving it down the field. But during this time, I just, I gave myself no rules. And it was really beautiful to be able to connect to this project spiritually and kind of cultivate creativity in a way that I really haven't for a long time. And what that took was me slowing down. And, when I look at the course of the past month or month and a half, I've actually been more productive, embodying that way of being than I have in a long time. So.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah. And I mean, it's neurobiological when we look at what Tia was discussing with the amygdala and the hindbrain and the forebrain. Our creativity, our humanity exists in the prefrontal cortex, and we need to stop and calm down to be able to access it. Sue, what was the biggest surprise you discovered in your life's work? Deanna Rice's question.
Oh, I was actually just thinking about, reflecting on the whole COVID situation, because, in Australia, we've had the most dramatic time. We've, in my region, we had 5 months of being directly threatened by incredible bushfires, and not just fires, but fires that were burning in ancient rainforests, Gondwana forests were burning, and that has never happened. And so sort of coming off the back of that and going straight into COVID has been a really crazy time. And I thought I would find it really difficult, but the surprise for me has been how much I've loved being at home in my garden and tending to my garden and doing that, and how much I've connected globally. So whilst I've been at home and isolated, I've also been connecting with people all across the world and having opportunities to learn from people all across the world, and doing training programs that have been involving people all across the world. So that has been an absolute delight to have that one going on. And I think the surprise and the interest from the pandemic is that we can do deep change fast. Here in Australia, fortunately, our government responded well to this, and we locked down really early on. And that means that we're sort of in this situation now where we're starting to open up. We've only had 100 deaths and 6,000 plus cases, which is really quite remarkable. But the significant thing is that we had a 98% compliance from the community. And I just go, okay, that's mind-boggling. If we could do this, we can take on climate change. And that's the bit that I've been really surprised about.
Thanks, Sue. So our next question is from Alan Garcia. What practice or method have you employed that's allowed you to move past blame and into such a positive outlook and action? And Alan said that the 12-step program changed his perspective completely. So that shift in perspective is really the only thing worth anything in the world, Right? We are trapped in our feigned otherness, and to get out of that, we need to not only become aware of how we are perceiving what the matter is at hand, and then we need to also be aware of our environment, right? And what is the story being told collectively? And I haven't spoken out much around COVID, and I've gotten tons of messages of people asking my thoughts and views with a cosmic worldview that I mentioned before with astrology, and a trusting, deep trust that everything's unfolding as it should. And more than anything, from the moment this started happening, I connected deeply to the mythic story that we're telling as humanity, right? As the virus sweeps the earth and the lockdowns. And I saw in the chat earlier, there was a discussion about how preschoolers will have to wear masks to school. And so stepping aside from any kind of idea about contagion and disease, I practice as a naturopathic doctor, and so I have non-allopathic views on these things. Understanding that a mask symbolically, of course, is covering our mouth. And we see a lot of the kind of resistance movement, again, these camps of people with so many opinions today, whereas I don't think that this is necessarily a time to have opinions. This is the time to have moral values and presence in ourselves and action in the world in a constructive, productive way. And so the conversation about preschoolers wearing masks, like, what is that? What is really happening here? Right? I haven't actually lived in the US for 14 years. This lockdown time, I happened to, get stuck here. I don't know if stuck is the right word, but this is the longest I've spent here consecutively in 14 years. And to be amidst this environment that I distanced myself from in my teens, because I realized the wave of stupefaction is what I used to call it, that was going on, right? That collective story being told by humanity was one that did not value critical inquiry and reflection and a deeper questioning as to what is, but rather it was face value. It was very much dopamine cycles on social media, whatever it might be, which we find all over the world. But of course, the US has been the global leader for decades. And in coming away from this and stepping back and saying, what's really going on here? Like, what's actually happening? And I just released a piece on Medium for anyone over the age of 65. So perhaps it would be good to send to your parents, many of you watching, or perhaps some of you watching, about no longer being able to trust the mainstream news networks and media, whereas it held purpose and reason and meaning 20 years ago, is now easily being bought and sold as an advertisement. And so, like, what story are you submitting yourself to? What are you listening to? And how much of that comes from inside and an intuitive knowing rather than action and reaction from some sensationalized piece that's been put before you? And like, constantly zooming out, Alan, that's my tip as to how to survive these intrepid waters. Does anyone from the panel have thoughts in response to Alan's question of what practice or method have you employed that's allowed you to move past blame and into such a positive outlook and action?
May I share? So there's a couple actually that have been coming up, so you can see me kind of like scribbling away. I also picked out a book from my library, which I'll share with you in a sec. But the practice was from a combination of two, actually. One was the work of Gautam Buddha and his Vipassana meditation, which has been really, really, really fascinating. But there's only one thing that I pick out on that, which really transforms the way that you go from why is it happening to me to why am I doing this to myself, right? This shift happens during your 10 days or whatever it is that you're spending, and you start to recognize that as you feel the world from the inner side of your skin out rather than from the outside in, you start to recognize that in this inner layer are all the sensations that you can almost feel and map out. And the moment that you start becoming equanimous, meaning that no one or other has more power than any other, but also has the ability to come, to process, and to leave, what happens during that time of processing is almost as if you're reflecting on why it's there right? You're kind of like accepting that it's there and that's interesting, and then letting that go. Now, what happens with this roller coaster, and we were mentioning it in the chat as well, is that the life is that roller coaster. Whether you call this COVID now, there'll be SARS in the future, and foot and mouth sort of disease, all of these different aspects, weeds in the garden, they're all part of the biodiversity that we're living, right? It's the biome or the biome. And the more diversity there is, the more there is a relationship with us, with what's happening around us and how we become equanimous to that. So there's the equanimity piece that was coming up when Alan asked that question, but also that, and maybe a little bit more sinister of what I've been reading, but also just want to table, is the work of a lot of people who've been part of this entire slavery, ownership of life, ownership of property and asset and control, which I want to recognize. So this is one of my favorite books. Let's see, you can see it here, Grip of Death. It's by a gentleman called, see if I can kind of like stand up so you'll see it there behind me. It's by a gentleman called Michael Rawbottom. Now, Michael basically talks about a study of modern money, debt, slavery, and disruptive economics. And just to give you a sort of a summary, the mortgage, right, that we're sort of part of is almost like the same as a system that gives you a voice but takes your power away. So your voice becomes louder, but there's less and less power that you have. And it's this, and I was just writing notes about it, but there's this whole grip of death being mortgage, or engaged with death till death do you part, right? The entire system has you gripped. And the moment that you keep on feeding that and you stop and you think, oh my God, wow, I'd love not to have to do this. That moment is where you change the relationship between you and the grip of death that the system has us under. So whether you come from slavery, or this idea of colonial power coming into your country, ravaging you and then taking you away for their own means, whatever that sort of the ideal of ownership has been, sort of relates back to the work, I think in the 1950s and 60s, don't quote me, but definitely worth exploring, is through Freud's nephew called Bernays, Edward Bernays, and he developed what is effectively the first wave of public relations. It came from propaganda, and because propaganda was then sort of misused during Hitler's time, he sort of changed the name to public relations. And his, I think it was Freud's daughter Anna, started to work with the CIA and use a lot of the tactics that Freud had developed. Bernays was using the tactics that Freud had developed in corporates, and she was using it in governance. And it's had a cascading effect on society and how mass media uses certain words that trigger the animal instinct in us that we react. So you're always in that fight, flight, or freeze mode because you can't come out of that cycle. So it's really fascinating that the moment that you start going into equanimity, you start to shift that and reframe that relationship with the outside world, whether it be that grip of death or the financial institutional power that disempowers you by virtue of its being. So I just, I was like riffing on Alan's question and Andy's points there.
Thank you, Tia. I want to check in, Sue, Kavitha, or Eric, if you have any kind of final words that you want to share.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Tia. You were very wise. How I've kind of dealt with this, and I'm very much still learning. There's I have some anger around what's happening within our system. And, when I look at, what's happening in the United States, like every single segment of society feels broken. And, it's easy to point fingers. It's easy to complain. And what has been pivotal for me is I read a book by a man named Jocko Willink, and it's all about kind of extreme accountability. And what I try and remind myself is that if I have a problem with something, like, what am I going to do about it? And, yeah, just try to, I try and spend as much time as I possibly can in action. And when I'm taking, massive action towards something, I tend to, feel a bit better about, the whole. And it doesn't mean that, I'm sticking my head in the sand or ignoring what's happening. But if I have a problem with the food industry, what am I doing about it? Am I educating myself? Am I looking for, leaders that I want to support in that segment of society? If I have, an issue with racism, what am I doing to be a better ally? What am I doing to kind of understand how I can be most useful in that space? And yeah, it really, just for me, and again, I'm still learning, but it comes down to, taking accountability and kind of understanding how I'm participating and how I'm showing up on a daily basis. And yeah, to kind of close out the thoughts, I'll go back to the question of hope. And I think that we're obviously living in a very hard time right now. And it might get worse. I don't know that this is rock bottom, but it feels like if it's not, we are certainly heading towards a rock bottom. And looking back at, most hard things that I faced, like, they've ended up being the most helpful things. And I think that, especially in the United States, the masses, the vast majority kind of has a tendency to allow ourselves to be distracted, whether it's social media, whether it's mainstream media. We kind of live a life of disconnection and distraction. And I think, if anything, what these times can do for us is, like, it really shows us, what we're dealing with. And we, have a choice to walk in truth or continue to be distracted. And, I think this moment is too urgent to be defined by the story that change only comes from the UN, politicians, activists. And, we truly need everyone. We need artists, we need students, we need athletes, we need moms, we need warriors and teachers. Like, we all have a part to play. And so, regardless of who you are, where you're at, what you do in this, in the face of these multiple crises that threaten everything that we love, like, there's never been a more unifying moment. And whether or not we make it is up to us.
Ho, Eric. We do a simulation during Youth Leading the World where we look at leadership. And one model of leadership is that there's a couple of people that come in and tell everyone what to do. And the other model of leadership is we're all in this together. And we look at a problem and we time how long it takes to solve it under those two different models. So under the model where we rely on someone else coming in and solving it, with the simulation, it takes more than 5 minutes to solve the problem. When we say to everyone, we're all in this together and we've all got to do our bit, we all have a role to play right now, we've got to get on with it, it takes less than 10 seconds. And to me, that's the critical thing, Eric. You just jumped right onto it. We cannot sit back right now and say someone else is going to fix this. It is actually up to every single one of us to do that. And that's, I guess, my finishing point. But an invitation, we will be running a global Youth Leading the World Congress on the 8th, 9th and 10th of July. Have a look at Youth Leading the World on Facebook. Look, I've even got a t-shirt to get info about it.
Thank you, Sue. Kavitha, do you have some closing words for us or any call to action?
I think what I take away from all of you today is that it's okay for me to be where I am and to actually feel re-inspired right now to move into action and to do that gently, to do that slowly, to realize that we have now a moment collectively, globally, we have a moment to reflect and take small steps in our immediate environment and just move forward, not to stop, but to keep moving forward. So thank you for making me feel like tomorrow is going to be a good day. It's almost 1 o'clock here in Bali. So yeah, I really look forward to waking up tomorrow. And I'm really grateful. Thank you for helping me reflect and giving me that sense of hope.
So thank you everyone for taking this journey with us over the past 2 hours. It's such a gift what Ubiquity gives to the world to have an institution, an academic institution that's non-traditional, right? Not governed by the same quality of capitalistic incentives that many of our big universities today have become subject to. And that it can bring together people from all over the world, from different walks of life, to do the work together. So collaboration is definitely the theme of COVID. And the Institute for Aliveness is always looking for partners. I'm sure Ubiquity is as well. Replenish Earth, the work that Tia does. Auroville is always looking for people to, with that participant action research, like to go calmly and to observe before making any assessments. And Oz Green definitely has so many trainings probably near you, and definitely Eric and his work with Now and generationnow.com. Is that right, Eric? Yeah, check it out. Definitely, there's a hyphen, a dash there between. I've just signed up for my subscription for Carbon Drawdown and Impact with these powerful projects, so that I know whenever I see that pop up. And I have one for Sadhana Forest as well from Auroville. You know, it's like $20 a month, that when that pops up on my phone, I know that there's something good that I've done in the world. And those are projects that I've been involved with intimately. And so I would encourage you guys to also, in this transition away from this extractive capitalist economy, share the wealth that you've been able to accrue through whatever it is that you've done, and put a little bit of it towards these projects that are existing. And of course, way more powerful than money is your energy and your spirit and the connection and the collaboration that you can bring forth. So thank you everyone for being here today. Thank you, Matt and Nora and Jim, and I'll hand it over to Reggie.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andréa, for mediating so beautifully, and for your energy and your aura and your wisdom. It's been really, really exciting and interesting to talk to. Thanks, of course, to all the panelists as well. I mean, just from the revolutionary voices to the creative minds and the vision that you all share, and the emotion and the sensitivity and the vulnerability and the knowledge. It's just been really, really amazing to hear you all speak. And thank you for the work you're doing, and for everyone that's watching as well, for the work you're doing to drag this old world into the new one. Couple things I want to mention before we end. As Matt and I and Nora were talking about this entire week, as much as we knew that the conversations would be inspiring and absorbing, we also wanted to make sure that some kind of action came out of this, or that we had something solid that came out of it. And so what we're going to try and do is put together a kind of working paper at the end of this week, with the help of some of the others on the panels as well, and see if we can put something together that may be a sort of call to action for this new world. So just keep that in your minds. We'll try and put that together and see how that goes. And also just thank you to the audience. These are great discussions. We can continue them on our Ubiverse community platform. We have a NextGen group on there. We're definitely going to share some of Lily's amazing music. Maybe Matt will share some of his. Maybe I'll do some of my own. So we'll try and make that a fun little group. We have a cool map on there as well, which will help you connect with people in the Ubiquity community if they're close to you where you are. So that's something worth looking at. So with that said, thank you one more time to everybody. And Matt, I will hand over to you for a preview of tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Raji, and of course, Sue, Eric, Kavitha, Tia, Andy. Wow, I'm so touched, deeply grateful. Thank you for showing up. And not only just showing up, but showing up with incredible wisdom and fortitude. So a really inspiring way to kick off our NextGen week. And we're really excited to hear tomorrow from Catherine Uhl from Synergos and Khalid Alachi from MCW Global, who are working on youth empowerment worldwide. And we can't wait to hear from, it looks like 6 youth leaders from all around the world: Bangladesh, Colombia, Algeria, Kenya, Serbia, and again, Indonesia tomorrow. So I will post the link to that event in the chat. And we look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow. And we've got about 5 minutes, so we won't use that whole time, but I would like to invite us, just like we did at the beginning of this call, just to take a moment to recognize the wisdom and discussion that we've engaged with here today, and to become aware of this moment that we're in and all of us here together. So I invite you to take a few moments just of silence to be how you'd like. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. See you tomorrow.
Thank you, everyone. Bye. Bye-bye.